Good morning. Welcome to Tees in Berlin. This is the first of two sessions. This session, I think it's actually in the slides. This session is Tees only. The next one is going to be a joint meeting focused on Yang. Of course, given that we're in the middle of Dave Ward's tsunami, we're going to talk about Yang here also. The note well is on the screen. This should be pretty familiar. Basically, everything that we do here is governed by our process, and you can read about it in BCP 79. Everyone's familiar about this now. But basically, anything you say here certainly becomes part of the IETF record. We are audio streaming. Looks like we have at least one person remote. So please do use the mics. We are also on Jabber and on Meet Echo. We are continuing to use Etherpad for note taking. It's also where you'll find our agenda. So if you go to Etherpad, the easiest way to get there is following the tools link, which is on the screen, tools.ietf.org. Look for the Tees working group and then go to minutes and select Etherpad. Oh, I do want to thank Matt for his usual excellent support and helping with the administrative part of the meeting, collecting and posting the slides, and helping with the agenda. We have two recent RFCs, one informational and one experimental. We have, I think actually much more notable is that we have the interconnected TE document finally out and requested for publication, and that's now in the RFC editor's queue. That was a lot of work of the working group and of the authors and of our technical advisor, who may or may not be in the room. Adrian? Ah, there he is, sorry. He has an orange slide. I don't know you.
Says this seat reserved for JavaScript.
So he is reserved for JavaScribe. Hopefully that means he actually makes it into the Jabber room. We also have a draft in ISG processing. We do have some other documents that are along the way towards ISG processing. We have a couple of a couple of documents that are past working group last call. There are outstanding comments to be resolved on these. We don't expect to have another last call because we don't expect to see substantive changes, but there will be some changes, and we would like the authors to discuss that on the list and get those changes out. Since the last meeting, we've had one document accepted as a working group document, and I believe we have one open IPR call. I was going to ask Matt where we stand on that. He also collects and makes sure and lets us know once the IPR response is done, but I guess it's a little too early for him in North America. So he's not on. But if you haven't responded to an IPR call that applies to a document, please do. It's pretty important. Later on the slides, we'll show our process, but basically not responding to an IPR disclosure call means that we won't progress a document. So it's really important to do that. We have one liaison that was received. This was actually sent to multiple groups, and it is from study group 15, talking about the work that they are doing on information modeling of that is applicable also to sort of our data models that we're developing. It's good for those models to line up. They are different, but they still should. We're hoping for some alignment between the information models and the data models. So it's good to take a look at what work they're doing and see if their work can help inform and improve our work. I think there is a response requested on this. I'm not sure there's much of a response other than thank you, But if you do review it and see that there's a disconnect between the work that you're doing in data modeling, perhaps we should discuss that with the study group 15, and we can discuss it by saying we see a difference, we'd like to understand why, or we see a difference and we think it's wrong, we see a difference, thank you for helping us figure out that we had something wrong. Any of those are reasonable responses. So this is what I was referring to earlier. We have a formal IPR process in the group where we poll authors and contributors with the working group being informed. We poll the authors and contributors on whether or not there is IPR covered in their document, and we won't progress until they respond. And it's okay to say that you have IPR and it's been disclosed. It's okay to say you have IPR and the disclosure is coming. So don't feel that you can't respond because some IPR you know about hasn't been disclosed yet. It's okay to say, yes, I know about IPR, just wait a little bit, we're working the process internally. There's been times where we've seen people not respond because they know of some IPR and they don't feel like they can tell us anything until the IPR disclosures actually come out. Finally, as always, our core work should be done on the working group mail list. And this is true for questions among the working group and authors, and even among authors. We're seeing some good offline discussions taking place, and then those also being reported back on the list. That's all good. Use the list. It allows others to be informed as your progress, and it helps build the consensus process as well as allows us to make progress. We already talked about the joint session. Here's the information on it. Thank you, and please join the Etherpad. We only have, including myself, 4 people in there. Be nice to get some more. Tools.ietf.org, look for T's. Also, you know, we didn't show the agenda. That's because go find it in the Etherpad.
Next up is document status. We currently have 13 working group documents that are active and for which we haven't put in any publication request yet. You can see that only 7 of those were updated since the last IETF. We have to start picking up pace on the remaining of them. I would take blame for at least a couple of those because I sent in review comments pretty late, leaving no room for the authors to publish an update. But in general, I'd like to see more folks send in their reviews as and when they can. First up is the GMPLS LSP fast reload draft. We talked about it in the previous slide set. We did take it to last call. There were some comments that were raised and we would like to see those get addressed before we take it to the next step. Next is the GMPLS resource sharing procedures draft. This is one of those 2 documents that for which I sent in the comments a couple of weeks back. I'd like to see those get addressed before the authors can request working group last call. P2MP loose path reoptimization. There were a fair number of comments that were sent on the mailing list. I'd like to see those get discussed on the mailing list. If anybody has any comments, please do send them to the list. And then the authors have said that they would address these comments and then request last call. Next is the T-metric recording draft. There are some open questions with regards to this. Those were sent out in June. They haven't been discussed or addressed yet. So primarily, I believe there were 3 questions. The first was with regards to additive versus non-additive T attributes. So this is the draft that talks about collection of T attributes via signaling, just like the SRG collect draft. So it talks about the collection of cost, delay, and delay variation. Cost and delay can be termed as additive attributes. Delay variation, you need some sort of a composite function to make any sense of it. So we needed to see some discussion happen on whether we should allow such attributes to be part of this metric regarding. And the follow-up question to that is, if we do open the room for the collection of such attributes, should we also include other network performance attributes that are discussed in RC 7471? The third open question I believe that we thought would be useful if you get discussed was, do we need a generic mechanism for the collection of these attributes? So there is precedence in terms of having an hop specific attributes that we used in order to say what sort of attributes need to be applied at each hop. So the question was whether we need to have something similar, something on the lines of hop specific collection, attributes collection. It's just an open question. These are questions that might get asked when we put in a publication request. So I'd like to see those get discussed before we get there. Anybody care to talk about it now? Any of the authors present in the room? Yeah, so please do weigh in with your thoughts on the list, and we'll take it from there. Next is the network assigned upstream label draft. The authors have spent a fair bit of time trying to find a good formal definition for alien wavelength, so they have finally given up. So they have removed the use of this term. There's some reference in the document to crankback signaling, so they've added a reference to 4920. At this stage, the authors believe that there aren't any more open issues, and they would like to think that that's ready for last call. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was writing in Jabber. I missed.
Upstream label draft. The authors believe that it's ready for.
Right. So Pavan is a co-author on this, and so it's not really appropriate for him to ask process questions. Since the authors thinks it's ready, it's been in the working group for a while. The question is now to the working group is, do you think it's ready? So we'd like some feedback. Number one, we'd like to know how many people have read this version of the draft, the latest version of the draft. So we have a few people. How many have read any version? Keep your hands up. Any version. So we have. That's actually a pretty good number. How many people think that the draft is ready for last call? So somewhat less than the first one, but still a number of hands. How many people have?
I didn't raise my hand on the second one because
You have to use the mic.
I can't say whether this one's ready.
You have to use the. It's okay. If you read any version, you may have felt that an earlier version was ready. So a question was raised: how can you? Well, it doesn't matter. Does anyone have any objections that to the draft in its current form? So to me, since no one has an objection specifically in mind that they want to talk about, it means that probably people just haven't reviewed it enough. I think we will move this document towards last call following a normal process, and that will be a forcing function for people to go read. If you feel like reading it before, please do. You don't have to wait for the last call to send in comments, but do expect this one to head towards last call. And we really want your review and comments at that point, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Next is the egress protection draft. The authors would like to do an internal review and then put in a request for last call. We do have a couple of questions. So there was a comment that Lou made at the last IETF, and I believe he made the same comment the one before that. This has got to do with adding some text talking about generic egress protection as opposed to it being just plain FRR specific. And the second question was with regards to there's this other document being discussed in the MPLS working group about egress protection framework. So we would like to know your thoughts about any coordination that needs to happen between the two.
Could we hear from the authors on this? Do you mind So if you can answer now, that would be great. So the first question is what happened since the last meeting on the question about making the mechanisms more generic?
So regarding that one, maybe we can add some description.
I'm sorry. First of all, I didn't hear your name, and I can't hear. We
One
can't
more
really
time.
hear anything.
One more.
Thank you.
So for first question, we can consider add some text to describe, to address that one.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So for the second one, I think that one is a framework, and there is a. So our draft first published 6 years ago, in March 2010. So I think this draft is a framework. It's come up late. I think first presentation is in last IETF. It's come at later stage. But even so, we may put some more text in the draft to have some reference.
Okay. What about, do you think there's any text in that draft that needs to be added or updated to be well aligned with your draft?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in that draft, it claims that no extension is needed in RS-50E for egress protection. That one seems not true. I talked to in last IETF, in the hallway, I talked to Jeff, representing the author for presenting that draft, because the author was not there, to explain him in details why the extension is needed. So that's in last IETF. But I think the extension to TE is needed to provide egress protection. For example, we may use facility protections to protect multiple LSP to the same egress. So in that case, for LSP, the label in the egress, we may lead that label to do something. So when we provide protection for multiple LSP to the same egress, so on the backup egress, we may need that ID or corresponding labels.
So you're saying that you would propose some text that needs to be added to the framework?
No,
That's
I just said the claim in the framework is they provide solutions. So that's so in last IETF, people suggest that part should be removed. So also the claim for no extension is needed in PE for provide egress protection. That one I think is not true.
Yeah. So perhaps Pavan has a good idea that you should provide some text to them. Do so on the mailing list saying to align their draft with your draft that you'd like to see certain the proposed text added. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I
Okay.
can provide why we need an extension for TE to provide egress protection.
Great, thank you.
Emission from Juniper.
I'm sorry, you have to lean
Sorry,
into the mic.
Emission
first to
from
hear.
Juniper. I'm the author of the other draft you mentioned, the Embrace egress protection draft. Yeah, I had already had an offline discussion with Huaimos, and think he and I are working on a strategy to align these two drafts together. Hopefully, we can make some room in the framework draft for we're looking at possible scenarios that may need some RCP extension.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks for the coordination. We would look forward to the outcome.
Yeah.
Next up is the T scaling recommendations draft. We did receive a couple of private comments in June. The authors, those came from Lou. So one comment was that the RA flag that's currently discussed in the base draft needs to be moved to the RA RSVP FRR draft that's currently being discussed in the MPLS working group. The draft, I believe, is up for adoption pretty soon. The next document, the next comment that came in was to see if the authors could split the document into one that talks about the recommendations that are need protocol extensions, and other document discussing the recommendations that do not need any. So that would probably result in one document for per peer flow control and one talking about RA RSVP. Those are still being considered, and the next step would be to address those comments from Lou and then take it to the next step. Last up is the RSVP Yang module. This module is kind of on the back burner because the current focus is on the T-specific models. There was one issue, the routing config module that the RSVP module inherits, imports, got changed, and that resulted in a compilation failure. That should get addressed this week. In the meantime, the authors are seeking further review of the model from the working group. That's all we have in this slide set. The first presentation.
Shifan.
So the next couple of presentations are Yang specific. These two would also be discussed in the joint session. The idea is to have the authors focus on specific issues in this session and have an overall update given in the next session.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning. I'm Xufeng Liu from Ericsson. I'm reporting the progress for this draft Yang data model for TE topologies on behalf of the authors and the contributors listed here. Since we have two sessions, so for this session we'll focus on more focused issues. So in the afternoon session, we'll do more generalized progress report. So, some summaries since last version. So we did some reorganization to the draft. We added the support for several features, including multi-layer topology support, protection on the tunnel termination points, label restriction on connectivity metrics, topology optimization options, and interdomain topology. So we will do some more focused discussions for this session. So let's we'll skip this, skip that. Okay, come to here for the interdomain topology support. So following the GMPS interdomain framework, IFC 4726, we need to hammer way to distribute interdomain links and do the interdomain path computation. So how do we do that? We need to do some modeling transformation. So here, this is an example. So we have two domains. Domain 1 on the bottom part, domain 1 and the domain 2. So the domain 1 provider will give a topology like left bottom corner, and the domain 2 provider give the topology like this, and at the right bottom corner. And customer side, they got two topologies, and they will merge them into native topology at the top, so that they can perform the path computation. So this is how they come up, the use case. So in that case, domain one, the topology, we have a few cases. So the domain one, you have the upper portion on the left can be a topology like that. You have 5 nodes. Since we can do the topology abstractions, so the domain one provider may do an abstraction to give a topology at the bottom of the right, or of left. So you can have either a 5-node topology or one abstract topology, 1 node. And same thing to the domain 2. The provider may choose to give either 6-node topology or the abstract 1 node. Then how do we combine them together, merge that into the native topology? So we have 4 combinations, like 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 cases. Here are the 2 cases we can have. So the customer client topology may merge the 2 abstract topology at the top, or they choose to use a different kind of combination. So we have lower part, a different kind of merging. To support this kind of operation, then we transfer that into modeling elements. So we'll add here in the link attributes, we will add the T node, remote T node ID, remote T link ID, and plug ID. So that we can link the potential topology together. So this is how it works. So if we on the domain 1, the provider provide the topology at the left side. Since the link here from S5, we need to connect to the node S3 in domain 2. Then we need to provide the remote link ID and node ID S3 and the link ID 301, which is marked here. So you know this is 3 and the link ID 301, so that they can connect together. Similarly here at the bottom part, they also need to specify the remote node ID and remote link ID. So here's a problem, because I see the domain 2 may have a different kind of abstractions. Then the node ID will be different and the link ID may be different. So to accommodate that situation, to provide the flexibility, we can use the plug ID. So here, we don't care which node it's coming from and how the abstraction happens. Then we can match the plug ID 11 and all 4 of them, so that we can have all the combinations. So this way we'll provide the mechanism for the customer, the native topology to be combined with the provider's provider topology. So okay, so this is how we do the modeling. Then during the discussion, we have some issues raised, so we want to bring to the working group. So one topic here is how do we choose this what type of the YAN type to use for this kind of IDs. So we may choose to use the number UN32, or we may choose to use the stringized, either URI or string. That's for the plug ID. In a more general sense, we also got comments asking that should we use this URI for other IDs like T node ID, T link ID. So we'll bring this issue here to have a consensus. So there are some different arguments for each approach. The reason we choose the number because see that this is inconsistent with the current GMPS framework and all the RFCs. It's consistent with the OSPFTE, SSTE, RSVPTE. We all use such kind of number, and so from implementation perspective, this is a fixed size the integer, so that will be easier to do the searching, sorting, and indexing. That kind of this is some database mechanism. That's how usually RDBMS and even MIP implements. And also because of the numbers, so current OSPFT can advertise such number easily. And also, if you want to do automation, because that's one way we want to do the SDN controller or whatever. So then we can simply increment the number, get the next one, do some automation. And the argument against this is talking about the usability because it's the integer, right? It's not easier for the customer to remember and write anything. So, but on the other side, since this is mostly machine-to-machine interface, so we always have a client software to do the mapping. So you can have whatever the convenient format at the user interface level. In that sense, because it's an integer, it's a more strict format, so you don't need to do the parsing conversion, and you don't have to specify what kind of string token there and how do we parse that and eliminate the ambiguity there. And on the other side, we have argument for the URI kind of type. So they think this is a future, and this will be more convenient to use, so that you can read that, you can type that, you can have a link mark that from Berlin to Washington. But yeah, that on the other side, so that kind of a string ID, the link ID probably would be difficult to OSPF to advertise. And then also, because of the string will be flexible, you can put anything in there. You can do any kind of parsing and interpretation. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, my name is Michael Scharf, and I'm one of the implementers here. I think there are two potential implementations of this. One could be a very constrained node. In that case, maybe some of the reasons that you put here for the numbers might apply. In the case of my implementation, we talk about high-end servers with scalable graph databases. And in that case, none of the things that you put here in favor of numbers apply. So you can sort that out in high-end servers very easily. So there's no difference whether you do it with a number or with whatever else. So a lot of these implementation things, at least in my environment, they don't apply. So the mileage might depend if you have a constrained device, but as I said, in some environments, those number reasons here, none of this applies.
Before you go away, in your environment, what would you like to see?
I would like to see either a string or maybe URI. And the string is very flexible. It can do anything of those, but a number, as I said, in certain environments, seems to me like a limitation. And I see no implementation reason for doing that.
So would you want to do this for every identifier in the routing domain?
In general, I mean, that I have that concern for a number of identifiers across various models, but I've actually commented on this more in the context of service models because this is my key concern. But obviously, there's an overlap between the service models and the TE models. And so that's why I think the concern also applies here. My key concern is actually more on service model that leverage the or overlap or reuse parts of the TE topology. But as I said, in general, in my environment, those models are running on high-end servers, so it applies to all identifiers. Thanks.
So Anurag Sharma, Infinera. I'm in favor of going with strings. And what I see is, in fact, we have already discussed on the mailing list as well, that the T model or the T topology model augments the I2RS network topology, which is based on the URIs. And then we move into the integers, and then it's again augmented into the URIs. So it's a mix and match all over the place. I think it needs to be consistent. That's number one. Number two, I'm working with some other SDOs, and what we see over there is they're all using UUIDs. So when we kind of do the mapping between these models, it's going to become extremely difficult to kind of fit everything what they have into an integer and move integer back into the UID. Number three is, again, I agree with Michael. The same thing applies to the service model. Yeah.
Okay, Igor Briskin, Huawei, one of the co-authors of this draft. So I do not have a very strong opinion versus strings versus or numbers. But one thing that I tried to point out on CCamp, and I'm trying to say right now, is that basically we do not model the internals of the databases. We don't model, for example, Michael's environment, something like that. Basically, what we model is how the databases are looked from remote, right? So with this in mind, it doesn't really matter whether they come as numbers or strings, because you have to consume and absorb it anyway. For example, if I'm orchestrator, Igor, and I'm talking to controller Shufen in Mandarin and controller Pawan in English, okay? But in my head, I'm thinking Russian, okay? I do not need to translate Mandarin into English or so. I need to absorb it, and I need to put it in my internal environment, and I need to use my own namespace anyway. Okay, it doesn't matter whether I get link ID 1111 from Pawan or some string from Shufen. I have to use my own namespace to rename them anyway. So this one point. The other point is that if we go with strings, it means that it will touch a lot of things. For example, strings will go to all EROs, to everything where link ID is mentioned, it will be a string. Okay, so deployment-wise, it could be an issue.
So Anurag Sharma again from Infinera. To answer Igor's point, you can model an integer into a string. 1111 can be a string, but Igor cannot be an integer. Okay.
Oscar. Okay, Oscar González, Telefónica. I am much in favor of having URIs, but with the schema of the URI specified, so we can know what's inside. I mean, for me, having just a simple transparent string where I don't know what's inside, it makes no sense. Or having now a URI also without having what's inside, let's say for me, is also unuseful. If the use case, as Igor said, is just we want to export the topology from one place to another, and the other one needs to understand what's inside, then this cannot be a fully transparent thing. It needs to be, at least also in a URI, you can say if inside it goes in some sort of identifier that you can qualify it and say something ... and the number inside a string. So maybe we need to make some work on thinking on the schemas of the URI and have everything as URIs.
Hi, my name is Tarek Saad, and again, I agree with Oscar. And this has wider applicability. It can touch many models, so the decision has to be kind of coordinated with other young models out there. And about the, because it's flexible URI, then you need to define an encoding type. So if you have a string, you don't know is it a dotted quad string or something else, a foo. So we need to identify what's in there. That's an additional data that has to be in every place where we have an identifier. So just that point.
So Anurag Sharma again, I agree with Oscar as well. URI is perfectly fine. And if it's a URI, no one is forcing you to kind of parse that URI. You can kind of use it as a face value. So it's not that only if it's an integer, you cannot parse it. And if it's a string, you will always be parsing it. So you don't have to parse a string or a URI.
So you're okay with URI plus an additional qualifier, another leaf?
Absolutely, yes. And that will put us in sync with other SDOs, yeah. Because this is very important when you need to map the entities. So entity coming here, map into something else.
Okay, back to your comments about the base network topology model from I2IS. Actually, because we augment that model, we inherit the model, so whatever they used, the URI and the link ID, node ID, we already have that. But here we're talking about the TE node ID and the TE link ID, which is having a different kind of implications. So we have two questions here. One is for this narrow case for the plug ID, which certainly probably applicable to this particular model. So that can be easily adjusted. However, the node ID and the link ID will have a much bigger impacts to all the other models. So we, based on the current consensus, the node ID is mapped to the router ID, which is we have grid on, which is a dotted quad. So that's a number. So if we want to change that, that pretty much you need to change all the models in current routing area.
So we're getting close on time. What feedback do you want from the group right now? It sounds like you have a strong preference, but you haven't stated it as such. But it sounds like you do have one.
Right. So my preference is I like to use the number if possible. So. And okay.
So do you want specific feedback from the group other than what you've heard?
I want to see the consensus of which way we'll go for. So then
Right. So it is definitely a complicated question. How many people care about this topic? That's a good number of people. And of those, how many have opinions on this? About the same. Well, why don't we at least ask each of the three and see what the opinions are and use that as feedback to the authors and look at it as a continuing discussion rather than a decision. So right now we're just collecting feedback. We're not reaching a conclusion or consensus. So we have three things listed here under one. So if you like the first option, you went 32, please raise your hand. Okay, that's a few people. URI? I would say that's about the same, and no, I'm specifically not doing hand counts. String? I have to say from up here, it looks like there's about even. So I'm glad I prefaced it by we're not making a consensus call here because come to the mic.
So can you ask for one more option, URI/string or string?
Are you talking about identifier plus string?
So basically
I'm assuming
non-UN32.
So we can add, yes. So if you pick any of the other two, So since we have a distribution of about a third, a third, a third, and you say who doesn't want one of them, yes, you end up with 2/3. Yes, we know that.
From here, I see the overlapping between the string and the URI, pretty much
So-
same people.
I think this is good feedback that we don't have consensus yet, and that makes sense. It's a thorny issue, and this goes back to the discussion earlier of let's talk more on the list about it. And if it's we have informal calls that go on regularly about it. If those help get closure, great. And if we need an interim, we can do that. I don't know what this is what Pavan was going to say. Maybe I'll let him about time.
Do you have other open issues? Or do you
I have another small one. If it's we have time, we can go over there. Otherwise,
you're eating into Tarek's time.
Let me take
Okay.
a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Short.
short. Okay.
And we'll squeeze a little bit from the non-working group document.
So we organized the draft a little bit. So we have a split model. It's naming. So we put we have a layer 3 topology, TE topology here. So the augmentation is the IETF layer 3 TE topology. And we also augment the TE topology to add the packet switching attribute here. So do we want to keep this PIC, TE topology PIC, or we heard some other suggestions and the packet MPRS, whatever we want to use?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Maybe
For the
everyone else did.
okay, for the augmentation to the TE topology model, we have 3 options. Either we call it TE topology PIC, or we call it TE topology packet, or we call it TE topology MPRS.
It's a naming discussion. Oh, what goody.
We can
Does-
leave them there.
Do you have a recommendation? Do the authors have a recommendation?
We currently use PIC.
Is that acceptable? Does anyone find the use of PSC unacceptable?
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
PSC.
oh, okay,
It's
that's
PSC.
typo. Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry,
it's
PIC.
PSC.
PIC is
The
correct.
the authors would like to use PSC. Does anyone object? If you object, come to the mic.
It's not a strong
Name?
objection.
Name?
Hi, my name is Tariq Saad. And the reason I'm objecting is because it trickles down to other naming and other models. So we have to be consistent. If we make up our mind it's PSC, and I don't mind if we agree on all models to make it PSC, then we're fine. We have models that are in MPL. We'll talk about them. They are NTs, but they are named with -MPLS.
The T models.
Adrian Farrell, I was going to save this, but since you've opened the terminology box, it really is helpful if we can use terms we already use for things, not just in this particular context, but in the previous document as well. And you might like to look at 4397, which was very painful and established terminology for a lot of this.
And to jump to the conclusion, what do you think that document will lead us to?
In this particular case, probably nothing. Other documents will lead us to packet, I think.
Yeah. So I was going to say that PSC and MPLS are pretty well-established terms. And of course, we do packet switching, so we know about packet also. So we have each of these terms have some good history behind them. This is likely to affect some models that might show up in other working groups, namely MPLS. And perhaps it would be good also to hear from the MPLS chairs and working group on it as well. If you're looking at it from the context of GMPLS, certainly PSC is very understandable, but this model is not GMPLS specific. It is general TE, so perhaps PSC is a little too much of a narrow definition. Before we move on, do the chairs of MPLS want to add anything?
just
We have
comment.
two of them in the room.
PSC is, what were you, too specific? It's too esoteric is what it is.
It's a little narrow. It's a little narrow.
It's too esoteric. I mean, people, the rest of the IETF understands packet and most of them understand MPLS, but
Okay.
PSC is.
So I think you've gotten some pushback on PSC,
Okay,
and you've gotten a push in the direction of packet.
packet is fine.
So it seems like it would be worth using that in the document and then see if we get objections
Yeah,
to
the
it.
implementation to Tyrex TE model. So I think he has that topic later on, right? So, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, there are other slides in this presentation. Shufeng would cover those in the afternoon session. Let's move on to the next one.
Tarek. you're up. There's a clicker.
Stay in the box.
Hi, my name is Tariq Saad. I'm presenting today about an update on the Yang TE tunnels and interfaces data model on the behalf of the co-authors listed here. The latest code for this model can be found in the repository pointed in the URL there. As was mentioned earlier, there will be another Yang session in the afternoon. It will cover this presentation in more details. So let me briefly go over what I'm going to talk about. I will skip or skim briefly on the updates because I will cover those in the next session from previous version. I will talk about the open issues in details here, and I will close off with the next steps. So this is an update. Basically, we've added a new module to cover segment routing, traffic engineering, augmentation, and I will cover that in next session. Again, this is the link endpoint for hierarchical LSPs and an update to be covered in the next session. Generic T label type is another update. And we also are in sync with the people developing the T transport model. And we'll talk about the issues that are uncovered then in the next session as well. So jumping to the issues that we were faced since the last IETF that the team was discussing, and they are under investigation at the moment. The first one is how do we reuse the generic T model for different technologies? So for this, we have multiple options that we thought of. We're bringing them to the working group, and we'll cover them now, and we'd like some feedback from the working group on what they think as well. There was an email thread that we started on the list, and we can resurrect that, but there was no consensus on the resolution. So the first option to address this issue is to create groupings, generic groupings in this module, generic module, and we'll have technology models import the generic module and augment with additional data. I have an example here. It's a very small example where an MPLS module will import and use a generic grouping and then augment with additional data. We have another instance of another OTN TE module, and it's again importing the same generic grouping and augmenting with additional OTN data. So this is one approach to achieve reusability of the generic data so that redundancy is not, or duplication of the data model is not, done. The pros of this approach is, yes, it allows reuse of the generic model across technologies. There are a couple of cons though, and I will, basically we have the augmentation of the generic model because we're only defining groupings will not be possible. So if you had if you wanted to add a proprietary item to the generic grouping, you cannot augment a grouping standalone until you attach it, until you do this uses, because this basically will define your augmentation path. Without doing this, you cannot do augmentation. And if you wanted to do that, that means you have to go across all technologies and repeat the same augmentation for the proprietary item. So that's one downside of this approach. The second one is referencing between the nodes in the genetic grouping is sometimes error prone. Specifically, if technology models start using this grouping in different places in the tree, the relative referencing of the path will be disconnected, or it won't be correct. So it can easily break. That's the point we're trying to point out. So that was option number one. For the same issue, the second option we considered is we will define a generic model standalone at the top of the tree, and then technology models will use this capability, mounting capability that is being defined at IETF, so that they attach the model at different places in the tree for every technology. This is an interesting capability, and we found it useful. The pros of this approach is it allows the reusability, and you have the augmentation possibility to the generic model. It provides separation of technology data. You have the MPLS tree sitting at different places from the OTN one. The cons are the limitation of the approach being discussed at IETF is a mounted model cannot reference anything outside the mount space. So if you were to reference an interface in the global tree, that is not possible. I'm not sure if that is still the case in the mount draft or the work that is being driven, but I haven't got a chance to sync up with the authors, but that was a limitation mentioned in their draft. So that's the second option that we considered. The third option for the same issue, again, was to define a standalone model at the top of the tree, and then have all technology data being modeled in the same model. What that means is you'll have your MPLS LSPs, your OTN, and other technology LSPs showing up in the same data model, possibly in the same list. Similarly for the TE interfaces. The pros of this, or the upside of this approach is, yes, you will achieve reusability and you have the augmentation possibility. But the ugly side is all the, maybe it's not ugly, but it's the downside that all technology LSPs or data nodes are showing up in the same place. It might be a negative or not necessarily a lot negative issue. So summary of the options or the solutions proposed for the summary for the issue number one, we have option 1, 2, and 3, reusability of generic data. All of them will achieve that. Dependency between data nodes and the groupings. In the first approach, we cannot do that, or it's sometimes error prone. Option number 2, we cannot reference something outside the tree, the mounted tree. And the third one will give you that. Separation of technology data for the first 2, yes. For the third, no. Option number 1 does not give us the possibility of augmenting the genetic model. So by looking at this table, if you ask the authors, we have a slight preference for option number 2. We will pursue, the mount capability to enhance it if possible. But if not possible, option 1 and 3 are of equal preference.
Have you talked to any of the Yang doctors about this and gotten any feedback, useful, not useful?
We did not talk, but we sent an email over the list. We didn't get a conclusive feedback. But yeah, it's a good idea. Maybe we should approach the
Yeah, I don't know if you want to try to grab them. I know actually they're all meeting right after this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps we can find Benoit and get him to suggest someone to work with.
All right. That's a good feedback. Thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else wants to chime in on this topic?
Anurag Sharma. I attended the NetMod meeting, and there was a presentation on schema mount, and it appeared that the authors themselves were kind of questioning the mounting technique because it was using the any data. So you might just want to touch base with them. They themselves were not too convinced about mounting.
Good feedback, thanks. Okay, moving on to the second issue. In our model at the moment, we have the point-to-multipoint and point-to-point TE tunnels and LSPs appearing in the same list, kind of, you know. This is not necessarily bad, but because we have multiple destinations or multiple leaves for the point-to-multipoint, it may be easier to model them separately in a separate list, in the same model, but in a separate list. And we noticed that we have in the MIBs that are existing today, they have separate point-to-multipoint list for the LSPs, and so we thought it would be more consistent. So it's an issue, open issue, but we have a preference to go with separate lists. And again, we want feedback from the working group on that. The third issue that I want to cover is basically RPCs that we need to define for the model. So far, the creation of tunnels are possible through configuration. This is the common provisioning method. And as well as an ephemeral state, a PCE and controller can come in and create tunnels or auto tunnels. We are thinking that through an RPC, we can also give this a possibility so that, invoke an RPC to create automatically a tunnel or even delete it. That will create an ephemeral tunnel, of course, ephemeral state. The thing is that this is generic that might apply for multiple models. So RPC to create ephemeral state is every Yang model out there could achieve that. So the question is it the right thing to do, or do we want to do that? Dhruv?
Hi, Dhruv from Huawei. One clarification question with respect to when you say that configuration at PCE would be ephemeral, that I would disagree with. It's ephemeral on the device where the auto tunnel is created, but it's a configuration on the controller because you need to retain that configuration where you created the PC initiated tunnel, for example.
Right.
So we need to be clear.
Yeah, I think I wasn't clear. When I said ephemeral, I meant the device model. It will disappear basically after a reload or, yeah. Okay, 3 issues and next steps. In terms of next steps, we want to conclude on the open issues. We request further feedback and review from the working group. We also wanted to touch base on the PCC TE augmentation with the PCC implementers of the Yang model. That was the last thing on our agenda. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thanks.
Do you want to try to get feedback now on those last two?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so issue number 2 was on having point-to-point and point-to-multipoint LSPs or tunnels in a separate list showing up.
Igor Briskin, Huawei. So I support the separation. Okay, I know that basically whenever you do anything with that, whenever you work with point-to-point or point-to-multipoint, you know that you're working with those kinds of tunnels. It makes cleaner. It makes easier to look up. It doesn't confuse the keys, everything. So I would vote for separation.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Okay.
Thanks.
Third issue. Do you want to go to issue 3?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you want to talk about the third issue?
Issue 3, okay, sure. Yeah. So yes, please. Issue number 3 is basically, do we find RPC is a useful way to create auto tunnels. Basically, issue an RPC and create automatically a tunnel, not through the PCE or a controller, not through a PCE and controller.
I think RPCs are nice. They kind of represent an action. And the good thing about them is the output. You can actually have a choice there. You can say, okay, it can be pending state, it can be successful, it can be failure, multiple of those. And whoever sees the RPC, they know what's the input and what are the different choices for the output. So I think it's kind of clean, like within the RPC bound.
Excellent, thanks. Looks like no negative so far.
Shifeng Liu from Ericsson. I think RPC versus Yang operation is probably a generic question to the NAND people. But personally, I think they can be used for different purpose. The RPC is for something instant. You don't have any side effect. Well, side effect is not in the state. So you may have some consequences, but at the moment you do RPC, you don't see some state saved, give you feedback, say you turn on, you create a tunnel, and you don't have the tunnel object. You don't have the state. But I think that does not apply here. So for this kind of operation, I would prefer use the Yang building operations. So you create an entity, then you have a state, you have everything there. You can check back later on. If you want to know the state, you can use the notification, you can use other mechanism. So I don't think RPC is for this purpose. RPC will be used for, like, you clear cache, you clear something you don't want to use anymore. So that's the purpose for that.
Thanks.
Igor Briskin again. So I totally agree with Shifeng. I think, say, suppose I'm creating a tunnel with RPC. So what about telemetry? Do I want to get any telemetry about this tunnel? Of course, I would. So it means that I need to have a state. Probably it may or may not be persistent, but it could be specified via other configuration parameter. Okay, so to support ephemeral, for example. But there's no point to just create tunnel and forget about it.
Adrian Farrell, I have no specific opinion, but I'm really wary of creating more and more ways to do the same thing, whether it's more protocols or so on. Because from an implementation point of view, you then have to track ownership and you have this thing that I2RS got into about who creates what and who's allowed to delete it and what happens on a restart and EEC. So if you're doing it just because you can, then I would say don't. If you're doing it because there's a real drive, then sure.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. So we're actually going to reverse the next two
Just one more comment on the
slots.
RPC.
I think we've take it to the list, please. I think we are reversing the next two slots. They really got into the agenda out of order. So we're going to do ingress protection. Mama? And we're running about 8 minutes late.
So I think in last IETF, some people have concerns about detection of failure of ingress. So this presentation will give behaviors regarding to the protection to address that concerns. So we'll consider 3 failure cases, including a combination of them. So for these 3 cases, what's the protection behavior for 2 modes, detection mode? One mode is source detects failure. Another one is source and backup ingress detects failure. So first, we talk about the source detect failure. So the idea about source detect failure is that source for example, CE, quickly detects failure of ingress node and switch traffic to backup ingress node. On the backup ingress, so it's always ready to input traffic from source to backup LSP and reliably detect ingress failure and send the pass message as needed. So here we consider one failure case, first failure case, ingress failure. So when ingress PE1 fails, source C1 will detect the failure quickly and switch traffic from ingress to backup ingress. On the backup ingress PE2, it inputs the traffic into backup LSP, and then traffic is merged at P1 into primary LSP, and then traffic is delivered to the destination. So we can see the traffic is protected. So PE2 will also detect failure of PE1 reliably using, for example, IGP. So if it detects the ingress failure reliably, and then it will refresh the pass message as needed. So we consider second failure, which is the link between PE1 and PE2 fails. So in this case, source not will any failure. It will continuously to deliver traffic to ingress, and then the traffic will deliver by the primary LSP to the destination. The traffic is not touched. On the backup ingress, PE2, it will reliably detect that ingress not fail. So I don't need to do anything. So in this failure case, we can see that the traffic is protected, and then we don't have any thing wrong here. Here we consider a third failure case, which is the link between source and the ingress. So when this failure happens, source will switch traffic to the backup ingress. So in this case, backup ingress will import traffic into backup LSP, and then traffic will be merged at P1, and then traffic will deliver to the destination. So in this case, even though we have some kind of a traffic switchover, but the traffic is still delivered to destination. On the backup ingress, P2 will detect that P1 not fail, so it will not send pass messages. So the LSP is still, primary LSP is not touched. So we can see that all three failure cases, the traffic is protected. So right now, we consider another failure detection mode for the three failure cases.
Question for clarification, John Messenger.
Okay.
On the previous slide, you are assuming that the detection of the failure is bidirectional. So it looks to me as though that failure is on the input of PE1, but so you're making an assumption that the underlying transport conveys that failure back to the source, correct?
You mean this failure, the link between the CE1 and the PE1?
Yes. This must be detected bidirectionally, this failure. Is that a safe assumption for all your assumed transport types?
Yeah, I think from...
Yes, so
Mike.
time is important when you're...
George, Mike.
So George said that it's just a matter of time, and there's a hello protocol that will come in. So sure, it's just that if you want quick protection, then that assumption needs to be met. Just pointing that out.
So we talk about the signal detection mode. We're getting to 3 failure cases. So the second detection mode is that backup ingress and the source detect ingress failure concurrently, and then they can control the traffic concurrently, which means that source will switch traffic when failure is detected, and the backup will switch traffic when failure is detected. So in this mode, for ingress failure, the source will detect the failure, it will switch traffic to the backup. The backup will detect the failure, and then it will input traffic into the backup upper LSP, and then P1 will merge traffic into primary LSP, and then traffic is delivered to destination. So in this case, we don't have issues. So second case, which is the link between the P1 and the P2 fails. So in this case, P2 detects failure, and then try to input the traffic into backup LSP, but right now, because no traffic from CE, so in this case, we're still okay, and the traffic is still going from source to ingress P1 and then deliver to destination through primary LSPs. So the third case is the failure of link between C1 and P1. So in this case, source detect the failure, switch traffic to backup, and then backup will not import traffic into backup LSP because backup doesn't detect any failure. So in this case, we have issues. The traffic will get lost. So in order to resolve this issue, we may use a multi-hop LSP to detect the failure from backup to the source. Another solution may be source can tell from link failure to whether it's link failure or load failure. So in summary, we present the behaviors for two modes. So for the first mode, I think it works fine, and for 3 cases. For the second mode, we may have some issues, but we can, if we can tell link failure from node failure, and or if we use multi-hop BFD across the board, and then we may resolve that issues. So any issues and questions are welcome.
All right, so a couple sort of more processy things. We've talked about generic mechanisms and FRR, non-FRR. This is only FRR, correct?
Yeah, only FR for ingress protection.
Yeah, so it'd be good just to change the title. So it says it's for FRR.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
Also, this is, we've decided that this is experimental, right?
Yes, yes.
So what work needs to be done before saying that it's ready to be published as experimental? What's left to do?
So what's left is that in addition to clear this one, and then also I think in the interim meeting, people suggest that we add more details for some kind of a corner case. So I think in the next version, I will add details for that corner case.
Okay, so since we're going experimental, it would be good to sort of wrap it up as much as you can so we can get the experiments going.
Okay, good. That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Adrian Farrell. Sorry, the draft's been going for a while and my memory is not what it used to be. Somebody asked me this week how this work compares with the pseudo-wire endpoint protection work in the PALS working group. And I wasn't really able to give an answer. You don't need to answer that now, but it might be useful if this document just had a pointer to that work and said why it's different.
Good suggestion. I think regarding to this protection and the pursuit wire protection, I think some people ask these questions a long time ago in some IETF. So my answer is that this one provide.
I think the important thing is to get the answer in the document.
Okay,
so
okay,
that
okay.
the next time someone asks the question, they just go read it.
Yeah. This provide a different layer of protection. This for tunnel and that for surface.
Right. So just get that in the document so that it to the reader they know.
That's a good suggestion. Okay.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to move. If you have a printed schedule or an older schedule, it looks like we're moving backwards. If you're in Etherpad, it's the next one. So this is Young. And it's, what number was that? It doesn't have it there. It's a PDF. Okay. And this is a PDF.
Hi, my name is Yang. On behalf of other courses, I would like to give you an update on the requirement for ACTN. Okay, could you go to next, please? Okay. I think it's been a while that I presented this, so I'd like to give a little bit more background and motivation of why we put these things together. This document serves as a repository of all ACTN use cases, which was the driving force for this work, based on many operators' use cases, and as you see here, at least we have 9 listed here, and maybe a couple more coming from different angles. They are wanting to have some kind of virtual network operations that share with T networks, IP and optical. From these use cases, a list of requirements have been derived in a different levels, so that if you look at the document, we have very high-level requirements and very detailed requirements per each use cases. And this also, this document provided input to the framework and also info model and the various solutions that is coming down the pipe. One of which I will present after framework and info model today. Just to give you a snapshot, this is high level, organization of the draft is as such. We have, I think, 12 very high level requirements, a summary of all those detail requirements, and we have use case summary for each use case. We identify what are the requirements. And then we categorize into 2 categories: service specific and network related. And we in chapter 4 we have some mapping of requirement into generic scenarios, and chapter 5 we have very specific interface requirements derived from actually section 3. All right, next please. Okay, so I think version 3 is mostly editorial updates this time, some grammar and some reference update and so on. And draft is very stable. It has been very stable for a while because this is just summary of what use cases are. So the contributors and co-authors believe that this is ready to move to the next stage. Working group last call, and just want to ask a working group to give some, shepherd reviews and so on. Okay.
Adrian Farrell, I'd like to make you an offer, Young, which is to just try to take this document and pull some of the terminology into alignment with the inter-domain TE, and also with the centralized controller PCE. It's not a change to the content of the document. It's just to try to line up all the TE work. I don't know whether the chairs want that done before last call or as part of last call. I'd be happy either way. I'm sure Young would rather it was part of last call.
Yeah, given that we've asked for that in past meeting, number one, thank you so much. And number 2, yes, please do that.
Yes, I think we are doing that in the framework document. This is requirement, so So I'm just wondering whether this is the right place to do that, or a framework document is the right place to do that.
I would say that anything that helps the working group understand the meaning of the requirements would be useful. So I think it's actually a very important step.
Okay, Adrian, could you provide some terminologies that you don't understand in this document, and some terminologies that you want us to clarify?
The full list of terminologies I don't understand is quite large, but
I mean, just give us example. Have you read the document?
what I should do.
Yeah.
He's offering to work with you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He said he's going to work with the authors.
Correct.
To help bring together the terminology. I think that's actually a pretty gracious offer, and definitely appreciated. He is the technical advisor of the group, so it's quite appropriate.
Is that a part of Document Shepherd?
No.
No, not yet.
No, it's not part of Document Shepherd. It's part of, if you want to look at it from a formal standpoint, it would be as technical advisor. And even if he wasn't technical advisor, he'd be just a working group member who contributes. And this is a working group document. It's not a document owned by the authors.
So I would not be trying to change the meaning of the document, and I certainly don't want to slow it down. I believe that doing this will actually speed it up. And so all I need to do is read through it and go, oh, no, that term in a different document, we used a different term for exactly the same thing. Let's put it all together.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I really do believe it's a helpful and gracious offer.
I don't know if this messes something up, but I'd really like to see it done before last call, so when people go read it in last call, those familiar with the other terminology can comprehend it a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think I said that. If I said the opposite, which sometimes happens, it was my mistake. Absolutely no last call until we settle on the terminology.
I just wasn't sure what you said.
Apparently I'm not either, but we're in agreement.
Okay, thanks.
So now we're moving on to ACTN framework. Daniele?
The offer was also for the framework or just the requirements?
He ducked.
It's longer.
Hopefully, the comments that apply to the requirements also apply and trickle down to all the other documents.
Hopefully, this means that they are aligned.
I would hope that terminology would be defined once and everything would refer back to the same terminology. I don't think we need to redefine in every document.
Sure. So this is an update on the framework. It was recently adopted as a working group, I would say a couple of weeks ago. We have a new author which joined the already big set of contributors to this document. We tried to work on terminology. Maybe some work is still needed. I tried to review don't remember the number of the RFC, the one defining the SDM framework, to get some alignment with the terminology. Also the T-interconnected draft, RFC now, but probably some more work is needed. We also...
Yeah, I think it's also good that you note on your slide. Oh, no, it's on your next slide. It just happens to show up here. I'm sorry, I don't mean to steal your thunder.
Latest addition. And well, actually, there is some new terminology, some of which is new. So that is something that needs to be reviewed, to be aligned. For example, PNC domain is a new term. I wouldn't be able to map it to something already existing, since we define what a PNC is here, but this is something that can be discussed. There is a new use case that is covered when we spoke about multiple domains interconnected. We only considered links between these domains, but obviously also the case of border node needs needed to be added. And there are still some open issues, some things that needs to be addressed, like, for example, the management of those links in between domains. We did a lot of discussions about the management, the modeling of the links, the access links, the links between the customer and the provider network. But we needed to do something similar for the links between domains and within the provider network. This is the slide Lou was speaking about. It's something we added yesterday. We received a question saying, okay, guys, what's the relationship with between this work and the PCECC? It's super simple. The PCECC in this architecture fits as a PNC. As simple as that. So this is where I have already basically introduced this. This is where we were before the latest update. Links, access points between C nodes and the ingress node of the multi-domain network, and the links in between them. This is where we are now. We basically are addressing also the case in which you have nodes connecting domains. What still needs to be addressed, again, is how to model those links. No, this is not exact, not to model the links. What needs to be managed as an entity over there in order to allow for the management of virtual networks that span multiple domains. What does it mean? For example, if you remember, we introduced the AP concept to identify something that is that can be used to represent the characteristics of the link, to provide a confidentiality bound between the customer and the provider. So probably something is needed also there. This is something that we need to discuss. If I correctly remember, Igor pointed this out. Probably nothing is needed there when you have an LSP that is spanning multiple domains, but you might have different LSPs that are stitched using that link. In that case, something that can be used there to say that a virtual network is passing through that link, that given resources are allocated to that virtual network could be helpful. Again, same thing. Next steps, discuss the open issues on the mailing list. I would like to thank Adrian for his offer to help us with the terminology. We need to find something similar to the access point and the virtual network access point for the inter-domain links. It could be exactly the same thing or something different. This is something that needed to be studied. Probably we need also to understand the relationship with the hook that is defined in the T topology models, because they seem to be things pretty similar, or at least one is a pre-requirement for the other. Another thing is the access point configuration and discovery. Up to now, we assumed that the access points were part of the readiness of the network, pre-configured before the operation of the network. There is no discovery mechanism in place as of now. Maybe this is a feature, it's a nice to have feature that we can consider and we can work on. And then the security session. Any help would be much appreciated. I don't think there is this architecture is introducing any particular security issue, but I mean some contribution or review from security experts would definitely be helpful here. And that's it.
One question. So basically, I don't understand. Do you not distinguish between access links and interdomain links? For example, when we modeled the T topology, right, we actually explicitly do not distinguish. And from perspective of PNC, in your terms, right? So PNC doesn't know whether the other side is customer side or another domain.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I think that's an open point that needs to be discussed. I'm not saying that they need to be different or they need to be the same. I'm saying this is a question, and thank you for giving your opinion on that.
Yeah, no, it's not opinion, it's a question, because we would like to have this input as well.
Yeah, probably. I tend to agree with you. I would say that there is no difference between. Also, because it is something that you need when you are terminating an LSP between the domains, and if you are terminating the LSP, there is no difference between an access point and an access link and interdomain link.
So Anurag Sharma, so just a basic question from my understanding, does this framework cover policy? I don't remember seeing it.
I'm sorry?
Does this framework cover policy? Like I see that you talked about security, but does it cover anything but policy, or is that a section which?
It was meant to cover also policies, but by the passing of the time, they were a little bit put in a corner. So if you wanted to revive it, it's a. But were you asking it because you have a proposal, or?
No, I just wanted to know because there's some work going on around the policy, like it's becoming more important.
Actually, we covered some policy aspects in the information model, but probably adding some text here would be a good idea.
Okay, thanks.
My experience with policy is that if you try to do it here, you'll just grow a big document that will get really hard to understand, and I think it ought to be addressed separately. Personal opinion.
More than welcome.
Daniel King, so just on the policy discussion, if there's no policy requirement in your requirements document, then you may not need a sort of comprehensive section in your framework.
Do you want to add the policies to the requirements?
No.
I would hope that policies show up when we talk interdomain, since we tend to always have some policy considerations at interdomain interfaces.
Okay. Last minute.
Did you send it as PDF or PowerPoint? Why don't we go with what we have, either way. So this is coming out of the time for presentation. So if you want to present your old one, we should probably just go with the old one rather than take your presentation time to figure out which slide set to use.
I have the key.
It's your time. If you want to spend your time loading slides, we will do that.
It's not much difference.
So please present.
Okay. I want to. We wanted to have to give you an update of the information model that is linked to the ICTN work. Just a brief background. The ICTN, the information model, is providing the information, basic information that is needed to be exchanged in the interfaces that is defined in ICTN. So we have defined primitive as object and action that is needed to be providing the object. So in this version, we just make some work on text and refine some text for definition of the object. We had some new definition related to some object, and we made some particular attention to give a look on other model and have some compatibility and alignment with other information model that have been presented in the past IETF. So, okay, this is just for background, is the list of the primitives that we have defined. We have no added any primitives. We provide some new definition regarding what from perspective of customer is defined in the input for the requirement for the virtual network. So the virtual network characteristics, contain that providing basically the connectivity matrix traffic that is required by customer to connect these endpoints, okay, bandwidth was already defined. We have already specified better virtual network constraint that is optional, but if the customer wants, he can add a constraint, and we provide definition for the possible layer technology that he want, in which they want to implement virtual network. The fact that you can want to have a diversity from, for example, another virtual network is already there, and then the shared risk that is a get information from the diversity in the tunnel inside the virtual network instantiated. We have better defined the survivability part, and we have refining the level of various survivability that we can have in the request, and this virtual network, the characteristic, okay, is mapped, and this is not changed from the previous version. Is mapping the different primitives as you can see here. So what I think that what authors think is that we think that we make some work, and the draft is ready to be a working group adoption. And exploiting this formation model, we have already worked on solution drafts, and based on the information that is described, and this will be presented in next. There is a young model for virtual network, and then there is a PSAP, the PC applicability related to the CTN model. I'm finished.
Oh, not going to the other ones.
Next, youngest presentation.
Okay, thank you. Out of curiosity, how many people have read the draft? A reasonable number? Do we have any authors of the info document from, is that Paul? No. Who's that next? No. I don't, Paul, do you want to say anything relative to the other info document? I think you were a co-author on that. No, he does not.
Scott.
I am.
I'm completely
Well, don't worry about it. Sergio is referring back to a document that Scott presented that you co-authored. Yes, yeah, that's okay. I think it's, I think we need to get the other documents that are sort of ahead of this cleaned up a little bit so we can make sure that we have the right terminology and right pieces all aligned. And then once that sorts out, it seems like it'd be a good thing to bring forward. At least that's my opinion. And it seems like you've had some, at least a fair bit of people reading the document. So that's really good. Thank you. I think Young is up next. Blue sheets. Who has not signed the blue sheet?
10 minutes.
No, actually, he's 15. He went faster than we thought. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, Young again. This is the first Young solution draft that address a particular part of ACTN. We have quite a few co-authors and contributors. Yeah, this is a ACTN architecture between CNC and MDSC. So we are particularly addressing the CMI requirement that customer they want to create virtual networks across this IP optical networks. Basically, they want to have slice of resources, not just point-to-point, but in terms of virtual networks they want to create and they want to manage and they want to modify and delete and change. So this particular Young model basically address the CMI interface and fulfilling few requirements from the requirement draft. In particular, how to instantiate virtual networks from customer point of view. And then they want to have life cycle management, how to update, delete, and modify. So that's the context. So what is VN? In the framework document and also info document, we define what is VN. VN is kind of convoluted term. So we kind of clarify what VN means in ACTN context. VN basically, we are focusing on customer view and customer network slicing, and not tied with how network is linked. Basically, in the first instantiation of VN, first type of VN is basically VN may comprise of set of end-to-end tunnels, for the lack of the right words. This tunnel means from customer to customer, and basically between source customer endpoint and another destination endpoint. As you see, a customer may want to create, for instance, 3 data center. I want to have full connectivity, or some kind of hop and spike type of virtual networks, or some kind of partial mesh. But also, a customer wants to create more than an endpoint view. They want to create some kind of virtual node and virtual link in between, on top of their end-to-end, virtual network. So these are the kind of the scope of the draft. But in this particular Young model, we try the first one, simple one, if we can model the simple one, and then we're going to get into next one once we have some confidence that the first one can be modeled. In the document, we define a virtual network member. If you have 3 end-to-end tunnel, we call that a VN member for the lack of better term. Because tunnel is a little bit convoluted term, so we just created generic term. What are the member of that VN? So that's the terminology that we clarify in the info model, as well as in this draft. So in a nutshell, what is VN? VN has members, end-to-end tunnel from customer perspective, and that VN tunnel is a CNC view, and that need to be translated into MDS view, because MDS deals with end-to-end tunnel from PE to PE. So that once a CMI request, VN instantiation or VN request comes, basically MDSC knows its endpoint, what are the corresponding PE routers or PE switches, and basically map it to end-to-end view from their perspective. And their past computation multi-domain basically calculate what would be the feasible LSPs for PNC view, because PNC, we are talking about multi-domain PNC, so each PNC need to create their own LSP eventually. So it's kind of trickle down with this hierarchy. So this is one simple example. Say, customer, I want to create a virtual network named Berlin, having 3 data center, and it has 3 members. Basically, that instruction will come from CNC to MDSC. I want to create these virtual networks. Please instantiate for me. Basically, MDSC, for instance, if you take member 1 from red data center to the green data center, this is how MDSC would compute initially based on topology view it has on an abstraction level or whatever. So it creates kind of end-to-end multi-domain sequence path. So MDSC basically instruct each domain that your portion is sources that and egress is that you need to compute your own LSP for me. So basically, MDSC once requests those requests to PNC, and then PNC will reply, and then MDSC need to kind of create an end-to-end tunnel view, and then this is kind of and the response to customer that your VN has been instantiated, and then let me touch with access point. This is what we defined in the document to clearly understand how customer endpoint and the network can understand the endpoint. In the customer view, in this particular example, we have customer endpoint port X, and PE has a corresponding port W. So customer kind of look at AP1 is a max reservable bandwidth, for instance, is 10 gig, and available is 10 gig, and it has C port 1, C router 1, and port number is X. That's their view. But if you have a common name like AP1, whatever string or integer, provider can connect that, what that means. From their perspective, it is P1 and the port W, for instance. So this is similar to what the Eagle presented plug ID. So kind of we have logical name to identify the interface, because there might be some security reason not to reveal real port name at the C router, vice versa. So we try to model this one in the model. So this is our initial virtual network Yang tree. We have access point definition and VN definition and VN membership association with access point and VN characteristics and VN preference. Actually, we read all the policy term out of the document. We call it preference, and then we have some state, and VN member performance data can also be readable by the customer if they will. So this draft today just focused on VN Yang model to provide VN type end-to-end tunnel type, a simple one between customer endpoints, and more complex type VN type will be presented in the next version. But let us just tackle this one first. And basically, we need to align this framework and info model in terms of terminology, and more work on access point characteristics. We are exploring interlayer representation using access point concept, and we'll evaluate missing items. This is very first work, so we admit that there are a lot of holes, but it's just first attempt. Okay, Igor?
Okay. Igor Burskin, Huawei. So, as you know, the T-topology model is not just for extracting topology from providers, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, what we're saying is that the client can say, I don't care what your physical topology is, I want you to present yourself as this abstract network for me. And I want to see these abstract nodes connected with these abstract links. And the client can also say that knowing previous topology, I can basically specify that this abstract node is actually represents this segment of known topology. Okay, and we also have all this machinery to connect, for example, abstract topology to the customer sites and to connect abstract topology between each other. Okay, so the bold statement is that we have pretty much everything you need for this kind of thing.
Yes, so definitely, the customer initiate, and then how you form topology. I think your T topology model actually has the view, so that we can use that.
My point is that you actually it also have a way to configure that as well from the customer perspective. It's not just
yeah, but your client, I think you're right in a sense of recursiveness, but here we are kind of demarcation point is between end user who paid the buck and then the interfacing with the network. So so we try to clarify that CMI interface in particular, your model MPI, if you have a multiple hierarchy, yes, that can be used, but this is who is paying that creating that virtual network. So
and we're talking about topology as a service. So basically, it's a client who is paying for topologies. He's asking for topology, and we call it abstract topology. We call it virtual network. That's the difference.
Right. So I think there's more.
Dieter Bella, Nokia. I would like to comment what Igor just said regarding the creation of abstract topology. I always have some difficulties to understand how you can create an abstract topology without knowing the underlying physical topology.
Huawei. I try to respond a little bit with Igor's comments. Actually, we are in this draft. We are trying to make sure about we introduce the virtual network concept and try to assume this is a kind of new service different with the existing ones. And we hope we can describe it via some existing young model works and try to reuse as best as we can. But if there is still gaps in future, we will fill it. That's it.
Yeah. Just to answer to Dieter, so basically you can always extract the original topology or native topology, and based on this knowledge or knowledge coming from someplace else, you can configure abstract topology. Basically, you even in this presentation, right, you have to have some basis to actually say what kind of virtual network you need. Right. So my point is that basically I encourage to look in what we have, and basically if it's if you need something else, you can augment that. Right. If as I believe is everything there, just use that. That's all.
Yes, I think the one comment is the actor of this virtual network is CNC. I think that is very clear here, and after that MDSC accept that, and then you create another subtending detailed topology. That's up to MDSC. I think that's your draft address that more clearly. So
I think it would be very interesting to find out what's missing from the current topology document at a very detailed level, like down to the leaf, of what's missing from that model to support what you're doing here, other than some name replacement. And by doing that process, we may find that there is something that's truly different, and it should be covered in its own model, probably an augmentation, maybe not. We can figure that out then.
Right.
Or we may even find that the topology model is missing something, and then we overlook something that should be in the base. So it's actually quite important work.
Right. I think one thing is that CE, customer end, that customer has to give and permission what my customer ends are to the networks, right? So this particularly addressed on CMI, that this is my endpoint, and then you create based on this endpoint, abstract set topology. So that's one difference I can tell.
Okay. It would be good to discuss those policy distinctions.
Right.
In the other documents. We talked a little bit about policy, and what you're really getting at is a policy distinction.
Right.
And we should tease that out
Correct.
from here and string it along to the other
Right.
documents or describing exactly what it is that's different and
Right.
capture that.
Right.
And
You're right. That's a good point. Unless customer want to reveal that, network will never know that, and this one address that. So we're gonna clarify on that part. That's clear distinction, I think.
Thank you.
Okay. Just as a small comment. So basically, customer equipment is an important issue. How do you control the customer equipment? So we actually have a solution where we have a term and a concept of tunnel termination point. And this tunnel termination point, along with the access links to which they're connected, could be actually reported to the orchestrator so that orchestrator can have the full picture, including customer.
Yeah,
equipment.
correct.
So
But customer has to reveal give the permission, otherwise you cannot work on that. Okay.
Just to clarify, Sergio Belotti from Nokia. Just to clarify to Igor, I agree with you, but in fact, as pointed here by Yang, we present this draft and we implement the first point of the virtual network that is based on end-to-end tunnel. But our definition of virtual network comprises the first level that is end-to-end tunnel, but also the virtual network that is compiled by virtual nodes and virtual links. And this is also has to be addressed in the context of
Except that it's already addressed, that's what I'm saying. That the access links could be permitted or permitted according to the model. So it could be supported by partners on both. And virtual nodes could be described what they actually comprise. But we need to still have a
Shifino from Ericsson. Regarding that policy aspect, we do have a plan to augment the TE topology model to cover the policy part. So we're trying to work with the super policy models to have a separate model for the extension.
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah. Quentin?
Is this the one?
Should they?
Hello, I'm Artem Rachitsky from Mobile Systems, and I will talk about PCE-CC load balancing use case.
I apologize. I guess the wrong name is listed in the agenda, and I'll fix that. So sorry about that.
And for you to better understand why would my employer like to use PCE to begin with, I will briefly introduce my company.
Slide view? PDF. PDF. Oh, that's slides. That's PDF.
We are mobile operator, and we have a bunch of services like fixed network, mobile including LTE, and so on. And we're using MPLS extensively in our mobile backhaul network. Basically, each service is the separate MPLS instance, and pairing between each PE in MBH is doing via TE tunnels. And there is two explicit paths. One is a main one, and second is for reservation for backup. So going to diagram, we now have more than 70 tunnels and more than 140 explicit paths. And when we are adding new device, we should build tunnels like that and twice more explicit paths, which is absolutely unmanageable. And we are going somewhere here to absolute mess, which is pretty normal for mobile backhaul and pretty unmanageable as well. So we have a bunch of problems, and we will focus now on load balancing use case. How do we load balance across different tunnels? Because building LSP manually is possible now, but it's pretty difficult in future when services are adding. So we plan to use PCE central controller as a single point of management for LSPs for our tunnels. Well, basically, when we have one single control plane for all the devices, we may establish all the session between PC controller and our aggregation devices in mobile backhaul, and PC controller will calculate all the TE tunnels, LSPs, and RIP for the devices, so that we will have on output a CMP between those tunnels built by central controller. So what do we expect from the controller for use in large mobile operator network? Those are pretty reasonable things. The central controllers should have enough performance for be adjacent with a bunch of devices and to calculate all needed information, all needed databases fast enough. And it shouldn't be a single point of failure. Means we probably would like to have like 3 or even 4 controllers in a high available cluster with real-time synchronization. And again, performance should be sufficient for this cluster to perform well on a large network. And the second thing is we would like to have pretty intuitive control point for network operator or engineer. Could be easy to manage the system. Again, it may be good. We may have all the southbound interfaces, but if it as difficult as creating LSPs manually, then there is no point. So we're expecting something like GUI for picking the services as opposed to label paths and cost for IGPs. Yeah, so that's all. Thank you.
Jeff, so question, how do you envision provisioning?
Name, please.
Jeff Tensura. How do you envision provisioning effects? So you can provision LSPs, but at some point you also need to get traffic into the LSPs.
Yeah, well, we expect the central controller to be point of provisioning not only ISPs, but not only LSPs, but IGPs as well. So traffic will go through L2 segments. Basically, one moment. Those devices have L2 rings enclosed, and they are the point of attachment for VPLS. So if we are provisioning tunnels, then VPLS should go through the tunnels, so that traffic from the L2 rings will go through that tunnels. The question is how to load balance efficiently, not how to pass traffic through the network.
If I understand you correctly, your assumption that you'll just recursively resolve remote loopback and have your traffic following the LSP closest to the loop, correct?
Not closest, but
the best one return by reap.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't see any need to specifically provision be more granular, not only following the remote loopback, but trying to load balance traffic across different LSPs or different subclasses of particular effect. Do you see need for that?
We have a need for that, yes. So we are expecting tunnels to be built in regard to our services, as the network operator said. So we have service 1, we want it to have sufficient bandwidth or sufficient RTTs. I mean, different services have different requirements, and network operator know it, but it maybe does not know about current topology, I mean about LSP topology and about IGP database. So the point is to just pick up services, not on databases.
Thank you. Dieter Bella, Nokia. Sorry. I actually have a comment on the draft, which I already made during the session that we had in Buenos Aires. There are some statements in the draft talking about complexity of signaling-based solutions that have been developed here at the IETF in CCAM, the CCAM working group, and in other working groups. And I think that such statements should be removed from this draft because there are valid solutions that are out there and are implemented in field. So I thought that there was agreement reached at the previous meeting that these statements will be taken out of the draft. I was just wondering why that didn't happen.
Quentin from Huawei. Actually, I sent the updated version to both you and the circle.
If you don't speak into the mic, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Basically, what you suggest is right. We have made a updated version, and we send the email to you guys, and we're waiting your response. Once you respond, and we will do another version of the update. But I agree with what you have suggested. We remove that paragraph.
Inamine from Google. I have a question. It seems that
Can you lean into the mic a little bit? It's not very good.
okay. It seemed in your next slide that what you're suggesting is that you are statically configuring label ranges and downloading labels from the controller down. That's what I understood from your draft.
No, we are not statically configuring it, I believe.
So can you Lou, can you go down a couple of slides? Click.
We are calculating the paths
more.
and uploading the labels.
Two more.
Okay.
Okay, so label allocation. So I was wondering, why are you doing that instead of using something like segment routing to get labels?
Well, segment routing is a solution, but it's like discussing why would we use one IGP over the other. So this is just different solutions for that.
So how are the labels allocated centrally at the controller?
Excuse me, can you speak to?
How are the labels allocated centrally at the controller?
Yes, they are allocated from the controller,
And what is the advantage that you see in that?
I see advantage in perspective for segment routing. It's just a tunnel built from the ingress. Yeah, for segment routing. And here we can control each point. We are actually building topology for all the devices. And PC central controller have all IGP database and all LSP database.
Okay, thanks.
Rak Sharma, are you planning on extending this use case to cover multi-layer?
Excuse me?
Are you planning to extend this use case to kind of for multi-layer? Right now, it looks like this is in single layer, but I'm assuming behind the scene you have multi-layer. So would you be covering multi-layer in the future, or?
Well, it's hard to say for now. We should try it first.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. How many people have read the document? Reasonable number. How many think that this type of document is useful for the working group to work on? More than who've read it. That's good. That's okay. That's a general. It's a general question, so that's good. I don't think we're ready to poll on the document because there's some updates that need to happen. But once those updates happen, we'd like to have some good discussion on the updates and any open issues, and then move towards bringing it into the working group. we're going to reverse the next two slots, just because we're getting a little tight on time. And so we're going to go to the scheduled resources, which is Yang Zhang. Mispronouncing your name, I apologize. Igor.
So, hello everyone, this is Yan Zhang from Huawei, and we have presented this draft in 9.4. And this is the update of this work. And some background services we discussed in the draft is the LSPs that reserve bandwidth in the future. So added value is that the services can be booked for a time slot in the future and provide some kind of guarantee. And further option can be, we can change this existing or booked services during a time slot window. So this is some simple background. What is the draft decided to discuss? And some conclusion in IETF 94 in Yokohama. And the initial draft was presented in Yokohama meeting, and there are two drafts and provide two solutions. So the summary of that discussion is there is some general interest in the group to follow this draft and this problem. And the group think it's more interesting to just pick one option and one mode, and the centralized model is preferred. So we generated the version 2, and we work with the authors of another draft, which is presented in 94 as well, and merge these two drafts to generate this one, and add Huaimo Chen as the co-author, who is also the author of the other draft, and some editorial changes. So generally prepare for the 02 version. And this is some comments, which is not offline. You can find it on the TIS mailing list, and thanks for the commenters. So the answer to these comments can also be found on the mailing list, so just to save time. So the next step is, this is clear in the scope of TIS. So, and it's an architecture, not the solution or protocol extension. So previously there are two interested to the drafts, and then now we merge and work with other authors to generate this version. And this is kind of based on some agreement based on the previous meeting. So now it's ready to call for adoption by the working group. So we would like to hear the group and hear the chairs to see how to proceed this work. Thank you. Question? Thank you.
Hi, Dhruv from Huawei. In the solution documents, we are mentioning about synchronization between the controllers. So I would expect if we can add that in the architecture document as well. So that at one place we get the view, it does mention synchronization is needed, but it doesn't provide any guidance that whether we are thinking it should be done out of band, or should it be done because there is a cluster and somehow it has happened, or do we expect our IETF protocols to handle it somehow? So thank you.
Yeah, okay, we will consider this in next version.
If you don't mind, ask Drew a question. So I read from that also that you think that this is good work for us to be working on.
Of course.
Assuming that, do you think it's important to do that change before or after working group adoption, or it doesn't matter? After, okay.
I don't want to stop the adoption for this.
Yeah, so this particular topic has come up in the IETF many times. And when we were focused on distributed control plane, we often said it doesn't belong in the distributed control plane. Now that we're looking at more centralized controller-based models, it seems that it's a reasonable time and a reasonable thing to be looking at. How many folks have read the document? That's a really good number. It's probably the most hands that have gone up all day. How many think that this type of function is good work for the working group? About the same number. How many think that this document is a good foundation for that work? You know, you win the day. You got the most hands on all of them. So it's clear that there's support in the work in this room for working on the document in the working group. We will take it to the list. Thank you. So now we're going to go to our last presentation, which was out of order, PCE and native IP networks.
Hello, everyone. This is the last presentation. So, and also the new presentation in the TIS. We have some consideration with PCE native IP network because all of us discussed in the PCE in the MPLS network. So the background is when we talk about traffic engineering and central path communication, it's always coupled with complex MPLS signaling. With the advent of the SDN concept, it is possible to use the PCE in native IP network to compute one end-to-end QoS assured path centrally and dynamically. So, if possible, how to accomplish it? This is our aimed scenario. You know, there are large traditional network run only the native IP protocol. For example, in this ASX, all of the routers support only the native IP protocol, and the traffic within this AS is changing dynamically. But some applications want to their traffic to be assured between, such as the gateway 112 to gateway 21, and require the end-to-end QoS assurance. So here we give one simplest example for our solution to the such requirement. We built, for example, there are two routers, R1 and R2, and there are many physical links between them. So we only need to 3 steps and can differentiate the normal traffic and assured traffic. The first step is build two different BGP pairs between each router pair using their loopback address. And the second is advertise different route between the different BGP pairs. For example, normal traffic is via the BGP pair 1, and the assured traffic, the prefix for assured traffic is advertised BGP pair 2. The third is we can set the next hop stop for different loopback address for 2 different physical link address. So in this work we can differentiate and separate the normal and assured traffic into the different physical links. So there is no MPLS involved, but we can also the traffic can also be differentiated. This is the dual BGP solution. So, but in large network, we cannot do such configuration by manual. So we must use PC for the central control mode. So this is the PC architecture for the PC in native IP network. We use the BGPLS to gather the topology, underlying topology dynamically, and use SMP to gather the utilization of every physical link. And we use PCE to calculate the right end-to-end path for the assured traffic. The last is we use PCP to communicate the different router and path to transfer the key information for the dual and multi BGP session. So here I just want to explain some question for the solution. So why we use the dual and multi BGP session? So the main purpose that we use the multi and or dual BGP session is to we can carry the prefix as a required different QoS treatment. So the assured traffic and their paths can be controlled separately. For example, if the application need to be protected, changed, we need only change the prefix at end passed by BGP. And if the traffic of the product application changed, we need only change the path to the BGP next hop and hop by hop. And third is intermediate router keep only the route to the edge router's loopback address, not the route to the prefix of every applications. For example, this ARET does in the BGP flow spec or MLTZ or OpenFlow. And the last point is in large network, router need only pair with the router reflector and not the every pair to get the peer relationship. So the second is why use PC. We can PC can compute path in central mode and can control router in path on demand. Another reason we select PCE is the PCP are supported by most router vendor and can easily be extended. So next step. So I think if the PC architecture in native application, native network is applicable, so we can extend the PCP to transfer the following key information. There are two kinds of key information need to be transferred. The first is the prefix. It needs to be treated differently. For example, this information can only be controlled at the edge router. For example, R1 and R7. The second information that needs to be extended is the route to the loopback of this edge router. So if we can extend the PCP to transfer these two key information, then we can calculate the end-to-end path dynamically and control the unpath route unnecessarily on demand. So we are looking for is there any person to interested in this, and we can cooperate with you to put forward it. Thank you.
Comments? Do you see the work as constrained to TE or broader than TE? Is it only for traffic engineering?
Yeah.
That's your only use case is traffic engineering? Okay. I'm not sure I got that from the document, but that's good to know.
Okay.
If it wasn't, it wouldn't be clear it belonged here. Any comments? How many people have read the document? I think just a few.
This is a new version.
It's a new thing. I think maybe talking about it a little bit. Also think about it. I know this is going to sound a little strange, but think about whether or not we had another use case document also that's using path computation. Think about if there's commonality there, and we could start generating a use case, a single use case document. It may be that your use case, I was trying to read through and figure out if your use case is just so completely different or not. But you know your use case better.
I think this use case is maybe more suitable for the PCECC.
Right, exactly. Okay. Thank you all very much. We got through a tight agenda and we're ending 2 minutes early. So appreciate it. Some really good discussions. And we will see you in, not in Seoul, but we'll see you in 2 sessions in the joint PCE session on Yang. Yeah.
So we're set. Nobody, yes. John will probably be the one presenting the PC chess. You're coming now, right?